Elena Rivera stared at the final eviction notice clutched in her flour-dusted hands, the red ink as unforgiving as the autumn wind rattling the windows of Rivera's bakery. 28 years old, with dark hair perpetually escaping from its practical bun, and clothes that bore the permanent stains of a life spent in commercial kitchens, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman drowning in circumstances beyond her control. "How much do we have left?" she asked her younger brother Marcus, who sat hunched over their grandmother's ancient ledger books at the corner table where Abuela Consuela used to count the day's receipts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus looked up from the columns of increasingly desperate numbers, his engineer's mind still struggling to reconcile the mathematics of survival with the reality of their situation. At 26, he carried himself with the restless energy of someone accustomed to solving problems. But the mechanical precision that served him so well in his former career seemed useless against the grinding arithmetic of poverty. 75 cents, he said quietly. After the utility payment yesterday, that's what's left. Elena sank into the chair across from him, the same chair where their grandmother had taught them both to knead dough and calculate margins. The bakery hadn't changed much since Consuela's death 18 months ago. The same mismatched tables, the same hand-painted sign promising fresh bread daily, the same worn wooden floors that creaked warnings with every step, but without Abuela's steady hands and endless stream of loyal customers. The place felt like a museum of better times. "The county foreclosure auction is today," Marcus said, tapping the newspaper folded beside the ledger. "I thought maybe, if there's any old equipment going cheap." Elena's analytical mind, sharpened by years of graduate study in art history before family crisis, forced her to abandon academia, recognized the desperate logic in his suggestion. They needed a miracle, and miracles rarely announce themselves with reasonable price tags. 75 cents won't buy us a decent mixing bowl at that auction, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she was reaching for her coat. Marcus's eternal optimism had a way of infecting her caution. And besides, what else did they have to lose? The Millbrook County Courthouse parking lot buzzed with the particular energy of financial vultures circling fresh carrion. Elena and Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, their second-hand coats and borrowed truck marking them as clearly out of place among the sharp-suited investors and weathered contractors who dominated such gatherings. Harold Price, the county auctioneer, commanded attention from a makeshift podium constructed from sawhorses and plywood. His voice carried the practiced authority of 3 decades spent turning desperation into commerce, each lot number rolling off his tongue with the rhythm of a man who understood that other people's misfortune was simply the natural order of business. "Lot 47, Price announced, consulting his clipboard with theatrical precision. "The Whitmore Flour Mill, located on rural Route 12. Property includes the main structure, approximately 2 acres of land, and all fixtures permanently attached to the real estate." Elena felt her breath catch as the mill came into view in the auctioneer's photographs. The structure loomed against the sky like something from another century, its weathered stone walls and massive wooden water wheel speaking of an era when such places formed the beating heart of communities like Millbrook. Even in the faded auction photos, she could see the craftsmanship in its construction, the careful joinery, the precisely fitted stones, the elegant functionality of industrial architecture from a time when buildings were meant to last centuries rather than decades. Now, "Folks, I'll be honest with you," Price continued, his tone shifting to accommodate the complete lack of interest rippling through the crowd. "This property needs significant work. The mill hasn't operated commercially in over 15 years, and the previous owner defaulted on maintenance obligations." The silence stretched uncomfortably as Price scanned the crowd for any hint of interest. Elena watched potential bidders drift toward their trucks or focus intently on other lots in their programs. The mill, for all its architectural dignity, represented exactly the kind of money pit that experienced investors avoided like plague. "Do I hear $50? Price asked hopefully. Nothing. 25? Still nothing. Marcus nudged Elena's elbow, and she turned to see something unexpected in his expression. Not just hope, but actual excitement. "Look at those photographs again," he whispered urgently. "The mechanical systems. That's not just any old mill." Elena studied the grainy images more carefully, her academic training automatically cataloguing architectural details. Marcus was right. The visible machinery showed signs of sophisticated engineering, far more complex than a simple grain mill would require. The wheel assemblies, the gear ratios, even the positioning of the structural supports suggested purpose beyond basic flour production. $1, Price tried, his professional composure beginning to crack. Surely someone can see the potential in this historic property for $1. The crowd had largely stopped pretending to pay attention. Conversations turned to upcoming lots with actual commercial value, farm equipment, vehicles, parcels of buildable land that promised quick returns on investment. Elena felt the familiar weight of her grandmother's teachings settling around her shoulders. Consuela had possessed an almost supernatural ability to see value where others saw only problems. "Mija," she used to say, while showing Elena how to rescue day-old bread with clever seasoning and patience. "The most precious things often look worthless to eyes that don't know how to see." 50 cents, Price announced with growing desperation. "The county will accept 50 cents to settle the tax lien on this property." Marcus was already reaching into his pocket before Elena could stop him. "Wait!" she hissed, but something in the mill's photographs had captured her imagination too. The structure possessed a dignity that transcended its current neglect, and more importantly, it represented the kind of purchase their 75 cents could actually complete. "Do we have 25 cents for something to eat after this?" she asked quietly. "We have enough for coffee," Marcus replied. "But Elena, look at this place. Really look at it. When was the last time we had the chance to own something? Really own it, free and clear?" Price's voice had taken on the tone of a man watching his commission evaporate. 50 cents going once. 50 cents going twice. 75 cents, Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. The response was immediate and unanimous. Laughter. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of amused pity reserved for people who clearly didn't understand the situation they were entering. Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Marcus stood straighter, as if the crowd's reaction only confirmed his conviction. "We have 75 cents, Price announced with obvious relief. "Do I hear $1? The laughter died as quickly as it had started. Nobody was going to bid against what was obviously a desperate gesture from people who couldn't afford to lose 75 cents, let alone maintain a derelict mill. 75 cents going once, going twice, sold to the young couple in the blue truck for 75 cents. As the crowd dispersed and the reality of their purchase settled over them, Elena noticed a woman who hadn't joined the general exodus toward more profitable lots. Dr. Victoria Ashford stood perhaps 20 yards away, her attention focused not on the auction paperwork being distributed, but directly on Elena and Marcus themselves. Even from a distance, Dr. Ashford commanded attention. Impeccably dressed in what Elena's art history background recognized as expensive but understated professional attire, she possessed the kind of polished confidence that came from years of moving through academic and cultural circles where appearance mattered as much as expertise. Her silver hair was styled with the casual perfection that suggested regular appointments at salons most people couldn't afford, and her posture spoke of someone accustomed to being the most accomplished person in any room. What troubled Elena wasn't Dr. Ashford's obvious prosperity or professional success. What troubled her was the intensity with which the woman was studying them. This wasn't casual curiosity about the fools who'd just bought a derelict mill. This was focused, analytical attention from someone who found their purchase far more interesting than it should have been. When their eyes met across the parking lot, Dr. Ashford offered a smile that managed to be both warm and calculating. She raised her hand in what might have been a congratulatory wave or an acknowledgement of shared understanding, then turned and walked toward a pristine Mercedes that probably cost more than the mill had earned in its final decade of operation. "Who was that?" Marcus asked, following Elena's gaze. "I don't know," Elena replied, but something cold had settled in her stomach. "But I think we just became more interesting to someone than we should be." They drove to their new property in Marcus's borrowed truck, the deed transfer paperwork sitting between them like evidence of either the worst decision they'd ever made or the first lucky break they'd caught in months. The mill looked even more imposing from ground level, its stone walls rising 4 stories into the grey afternoon sky. The water wheel, motionless for years, cast geometric shadows across ground that showed no signs of recent human activity. 75 cents, Elena murmured as they stood before their purchase. "We just bought a piece of history for 3 quarters. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Marcus was already walking the perimeter, his engineer's eye cataloguing structural details and mechanical possibilities. "Elena, come look at this foundation work. This isn't just functional construction. Someone put real money into building this place to last." She joined him at the base of the mill, running her hands along stone walls that showed the kind of precise craftsmanship that belonged to an era when individual pride shaped every joint and corner. The building felt solid despite its obvious neglect, as if it was simply waiting patiently for someone with vision and energy to restore its purpose. "Think we can get inside?" Marcus asked, examining the main entrance where a modern padlock secured doors that looked original to the structure. "We own it," Elena replied, surprised by the strange satisfaction those words brought. For the first time in months, they owned something that nobody could take away from them. Something with potential. The lock yielded to bolt cutters borrowed from a neighbor, and the mill's interior revealed itself in dusty shafts of afternoon light filtering through high windows. Elena's first impression was of scale. The main grinding chamber rose through multiple floors, creating a cathedral-like space that dwarfed the external dimensions suggested. Massive wooden beams supported machinery that clearly represented decades of modification and refinement, and even covered in dust and neglect. The mechanical systems showed evidence of sophisticated engineering. "This is incredible," Marcus whispered, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Look at these gear ratios. This isn't just grain milling equipment. This is precision machinery." Elena found herself drawn not to the mechanical systems, but to the architectural details that spoke of the mill's long history. Tool marks in the wooden beams showed signs of handcraftsmanship. Stone blocks in the walls had been fitted with mathematical precision. Even the positioning of the machinery suggested careful planning by someone who understood both engineering and aesthetics. As she moved deeper into the mill, examining the interplay between structure and function, Elena became aware of something unusual about the acoustic properties of the space. Her voice, when she called to Marcus, seemed to behave strangely, sometimes carrying clearly across the chamber, sometimes seeming to disappear entirely despite his proximity. "Marcus, say something," she called from the opposite side of the main grinding mechanism. "What do you want me to say?" His voice came back, but it seemed to originate from a different location than where she could see him standing. Elena moved to a different position and tried again. "Can you hear me now?" This time his response came from yet another direction, as if the sound were being redirected through the mill's architecture in ways that defied the apparent layout of the space. "There's something weird about the acoustics in here," she announced. But even as she spoke, She was beginning to suspect that the acoustic anomalies weren't accidents of construction, but evidence of deliberate design. The morning after their impulsive purchase, Elena and Marcus returned to the mill carrying toolboxes, flashlights, and the kind of determined energy that comes from having committed to something beyond rational explanation. Elena had spent the night researching mill construction and restoration, while Marcus had filled 3 notebooks with measurements and mechanical observations from their initial exploration. "I've been thinking about those acoustic effects," Elena said as they approached the main entrance. "In my art history studies, I learned about architectural designs that incorporated sound manipulation, churches, theaters, even some residential buildings where architects wanted to create specific auditory experiences." Marcus nodded, already focused on the mechanical puzzle the mill presented. "And I've been thinking about those gear systems. The ratios are wrong for grain milling, but they'd be perfect for precision work, maybe clockmaking or fine instrument manufacturing." The mill's interior felt different in the morning light. Details that had been obscured by shadows the previous afternoon now revealed themselves with startling clarity. Elena noticed that the supposedly random arrangement of machinery actually followed geometric patterns, with certain components positioned at intervals that suggested mathematical rather than merely functional relationships. "Try standing right here," she told Marcus, positioning herself at what appeared to be the acoustic center of the chamber. "And listen to this." She spoke in a normal conversational tone, but her words seemed to resonate through the mill's architecture with unusual clarity and projection. Marcus moved to different positions around the chamber, reporting that her voice seemed to originate from various points despite her stationary position. "It's like the building is designed to redirect sound," he said, excitement growing in his voice. "But why would a flour mill need acoustic engineering?" Elena was examining the massive grinding stones when she discovered something that made her pulse quicken. Carved discreetly into the edge of the upper stone, almost invisible unless viewed from a specific angle, were initials: C.R. Consuela Rivera. "Marcus, come here," she called, her voice carefully controlled despite the shock of discovery. "Look at this." He joined her beside the grinding mechanism, following her pointing finger to the barely visible carving. "Abuela was here," he said quietly. "But when? And why?" Before Elena could respond, the sound of footsteps on the mill's wooden floors announced that they were no longer alone. Both siblings turned toward the entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the morning light. "Hope I'm not intruding," came a familiar voice as Jimmy Kowalski stepped into the chamber, his tool belt jingling with the comfortable authority of someone who'd spent decades solving mechanical problems. "I heard you folks bought yourselves the old Whitmore place." Elena felt her shoulders relax slightly. Jimmy had been one of the few people in Millbrook who'd treated them with genuine kindness since their grandmother's death, and his mechanical expertise had kept their bakery's aging equipment functional long past its reasonable lifespan. "Jimmy, thank God," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "We could use someone who actually knows what they're looking at." Jimmy approached the grinding mechanism with the careful attention of a professional, his weathered hands automatically testing the stability of various components. "This is some serious machinery," he said approvingly. Whoever built this knew their business, but as Jimmy examined the mill's systems, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "Folks, I need to tell you something, and I need you to take it seriously," he said, his usual easy manner replaced by obvious concern. "There's been some strange things happening around town lately. People who've shown interest in old properties, especially places with history. Some of them have had accidents." Elena felt the chill that had settled in her stomach the previous day return with renewed intensity. "What kind of accidents?" "Tom Bradley, who runs the antique shop down on Main Street? He was asking questions about old buildings, looking into purchasing some properties for renovation. Found him at the bottom of his basement stairs 3 weeks ago. Broken neck." Jimmy's voice carried the weight of personal knowledge. "Medical examiner called it accidental, said he must have lost his footing. But Tom was the most sure-footed man I ever knew. Marcus had stopped his examination of the machinery and was listening with growing alarm. "Jimmy, are you saying someone's deliberately hurting people?" "I'm saying there's a pattern," Jimmy replied carefully. "And I'm saying you two should be careful about who you talk to regarding what you might find in this place." As if summoned by Jimmy's warning, Elena's phone began ringing. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but she answered with growing unease. "Miss Rivera? This is Dr. Victoria Ashford from the Millbrook Historical Society. I was at the auction yesterday and couldn't help but notice your inspired purchase. I wonder if I might stop by and offer some assistance with your restoration project." Elena met Marcus's eyes, seeing her own suspicion reflected in his expression. Dr. Ashford's interest in their 75-cent mill seemed far too convenient, especially in light of Jimmy's warnings about people who showed interest in historical properties. "I appreciate the offer, Dr. Ashford, but we're still just getting oriented with the property," Elena replied carefully. Of course. But I do hope you'll contact me if you discover anything unusual. Historical properties often contain surprises, and it's important that any significant findings be properly documented and preserved." The call ended, but Elena felt anything but reassured. Dr. Ashford's emphasis on unusual discoveries suggested knowledge the woman shouldn't possess about a mill she'd never supposedly examined. That was the woman from the auction yesterday, Elena told Jimmy and Marcus. "She wants to help with our restoration project." Jimmy's expression darkened. "Dr. Ashford's been around town asking a lot of questions lately. Historical research, she says, but she's been particularly interested in properties that have changed hands recently." As they talked, Elena found herself unconsciously moving toward the position where the mill's acoustic properties seemed most pronounced. From this spot, she could hear not just their conversation with unusual clarity, but also sounds that seemed to originate from other parts of the building, sounds that suggested the mill's interior was more complex than its apparent single chamber. "Listen," she said quietly, holding up her hand for silence. In the stillness, they could all hear it, a faint echo that seemed to come from below their feet, as if their voices were being carried into spaces that shouldn't exist. The mill's public record showed a single-story structure with basement storage, but the acoustic evidence suggested hidden chambers or passages that weren't reflected in any official documentation. Marcus knelt and pressed his ear to the wooden floor. "There's definitely space down there," he said. "But I don't see any obvious access points." Jimmy was already examining the grinding mechanism with renewed interest. "You know, I've been wondering about these modifications," he said, pointing to several gear assemblies that clearly didn't match the mill's original construction. "What if this isn't just milling equipment? What if it's designed to operate other systems?" Elena felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in her mind. The acoustic anomalies, the sophisticated machinery, her grandmother's hidden presence in this place, and now Dr. Ashford's suspiciously convenient interest. All of it suggested that their 75-cent purchase had connected them to something far more complex than a simple mill restoration. "Jimmy, how well did you know our grandmother?" she asked suddenly. Jimmy's expression grew thoughtful. "Consuela was special. Always seemed to know more about what was happening in town than most people. Had visitors sometimes, folks who didn't look like they were from around here. Professional types, you know. Always thought she had some kind of background she didn't talk about." As Jimmy spoke, Elena noticed that his attention kept drifting to specific areas of the mill, the grinding mechanism, certain structural supports, the positioning of various architectural elements. His familiarity with the space seemed to go beyond general mechanical knowledge. "Jimmy," Marcus said slowly, "have you been in this mill before?" Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, his hands running along one of the massive wooden beams that supported the grinding mechanism. "Your grandmother asked me to keep an eye on this place after the previous owner died," he admitted. "Never told me why exactly, but Consuela wasn't the type to ask favors without good reason." Elena felt her understanding of their situation shifting once again. Their purchase hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated, planned, arranged by their grandmother before her death. But for what purpose? What else did Abuela ask you to do? She pressed. Jimmy reached into his tool bag and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age but still intact. She gave me this about 6 months before she died. Told me to give it to you if you ever came asking questions about the mill. Elena accepted the envelope with trembling hands, her grandmother's familiar handwriting spelling out her name across the aged paper. Inside, she found a brief note that raised more questions than it answered. Mija, if you are reading this, then you have found your way to the mill, as I hoped you would. The answers you seek are hidden where the music is strongest. Trust your education, trust your brother's skills, but most importantly, trust no one else until you understand what your grandfather and I protected all these years. The symbols will guide you, but remember, some knowledge is dangerous to possess. Love always, Abuela. Marcus read the note over Elena's shoulder, his expression growing more troubled with each line. What grandfather? Dad's father died when we were babies, and you never talked about your father's family. Elena stared at the note, her art historian's training automatically analyzing the handwriting, the paper, the implications of her grandmother's words. The reference to symbols suggested iconographic knowledge, while the mention of music clearly related to the mill's acoustic properties. We need to understand what this place really is, she said finally, and we need to do it before Dr. Ashford or anyone else decides we know too much. Elena spent the remainder of the day in the mill with Marcus and Jimmy, systematically examining every surface for the symbols her grandmother's note had referenced. The search revealed details that had been invisible during their initial exploration, subtle marks carved into wooden beams, stone alignments that seemed too precise to be coincidental, and metal fittings that showed signs of recent maintenance, despite the mill's supposedly abandoned condition. "Here!" Elena called from her position near the grinding mechanism's primary gear assembly. "These aren't wear marks. These are deliberate carvings." Marcus and Jimmy joined her beside the massive wooden gear wheel, where Elena had discovered a series of symbols carved into the hardwood with precision that suggested both artistic skill and cultural knowledge. The markings were small, almost invisible unless viewed from the correct angle, but once identified, they formed a clear pattern around the gear's circumference. "These are pre-Columbian," Elena said, her academic training allowing her to recognize the iconographic style, even if she couldn't immediately interpret the specific meanings. Probably Aztec or Maya, but modified, like someone was adapting traditional symbols for a specific purpose. Jimmy examined the carvings with the practical eye of a mechanic who'd spent decades working with precision machinery. "They're positioned at exact intervals," he observed. 12 symbols equally spaced. If this gear were rotated to specific positions, it would function as a combination mechanism. Marcus finished, excitement growing in his voice. "Elena, remember the acoustic effects? What if the positions correspond to the points where the sound projection changes?" Elena felt the pieces of her grandmother's puzzle beginning to align with startling clarity. The mill's sophisticated acoustic design wasn't accidental. It was a guidance system, directing them toward the correct sequence of operations needed to unlock whatever secrets the structure contained. "We need to test this systematically," she said, moving toward the position where the mill's acoustic properties seemed most pronounced. "Marcus, can you rotate that gear wheel manually?" With Jimmy's help, Marcus engaged the mill's manual operating system, allowing them to position the primary gear at each of the 12 symbol locations. At most positions, Elena's voice behaved normally within the chamber's acoustics. But at 3 specific symbols, positions that corresponded to iconographs representing earth, water, and sky in various pre-Columbian traditions, her voice seemed to resonate through the mill's architecture with unusual clarity and projection. "Earth, water, sky," Elena murmured, her art history background providing cultural context for the symbols. In most Mesoamerican traditions, these represent the fundamental elements of creation and balance. And in mechanical terms, Marcus added, they represent the optimal positions for whatever this mechanism is designed to activate. Jimmy had been examining the mill's structural supports while Elena and Marcus worked with the grinding mechanism, and his expression suggested he'd made discoveries of his own. "You need to see this," he said, directing their attention to a section of wooden flooring that appeared identical to the surrounding area but showed subtle signs of modification. Kneeling beside Jimmy, Elena could see what his experienced eye had detected. The wood grain patterns didn't quite match, and the floor sections showed microscopic gaps that suggested they weren't permanently fixed in place. "Hidden access," Marcus said immediately. "But how does it operate?" The answer came when Elena noticed that the acoustic properties of her voice changed dramatically when she stood directly over the modified floor sections. Her words seemed to disappear entirely, as if being absorbed by the mill's architecture rather than reflected through it. "The combination," she said suddenly. We need to position the gear mechanism in the sequence indicated by the strongest acoustic points. Then trigger whatever system opens this access. With careful coordination, Marcus rotated the grinding mechanism to each of the 3 positions Elena had identified, while Jimmy examined the floor sections for signs of mechanical response. On the 3rd position, the symbol representing sky, they heard a distinct mechanical sound from beneath the wooden floor, followed by a soft click that suggested the release of some hidden locking mechanism. Elena felt her heart racing as a section of flooring near the grinding mechanism shifted slightly, revealing itself to be a carefully concealed door rather than a permanent structural element. The opening revealed wooden steps descending into darkness, with walls that showed the same precision stonework as the mill's main structure. "Should we—" Marcus began, but Elena was already reaching for the flashlight she'd brought from the truck. "We've come this far," she said, the words sharper with resolve than with certainty. "Besides, whatever's down there, Abuela wanted us to find it." The wooden steps gave a solid, reassuring creak beneath their feet. Despite the mill's public ruin, the hidden stairway looked recently cared for, as if someone had tended these secret systems long after the storefront fell quiet. The passage opened into a chamber carved straight from bedrock, its scale impossible for a building that looked so shallow from above. Elena's flashlight skated across walls lined in wooden shelving. On those shelves, wrapped in stained cloth and arranged with fastidious care, lay objects that stole her breath: pottery, sculpture, metalwork, woven textiles, pieces that belonged in climate-controlled galleries. Not in a subterranean room beneath a disused mill. Even half-concealed, their forms and ornamentations screamed pre-Columbian provenance. "My God," she breathed, the scholar in her cataloguing instinct kicking in before her fear. "These are museum quality. Some of these could be priceless." Marcus ran a hand along the chamber's finishes, eyes widening. "This isn't storage. Look at the ventilation ducts, humidity controls, the wiring. Whoever built this invested in archival conditions. Proper conservation, not a thief's stash." Jimmy's voice came low from the far side of the room. A work table cluttered with folders and photographs lay against the wall, each page arranged like a case file. "You better see this," he said. They crowded the table. Elena's light revealed photographs of the very objects on the shelves. Only there they sat behind placards in established museums. Detailed notes and catalogue numbers accompanied them. Newspaper clippings documented a series of high-profile cultural thefts across 3 decades. "These aren't just stolen," Elena whispered, stomach tightening. "They've been catalogued, moved, photographed. This reads like evidence." Marcus flipped a folder. Articles clipped from the Millbrook Herald told of locals who'd asked awkward questions about historical properties, people who'd later died in accidents. He held up margin notes, incredulous. "Look at these handwritten annotations," Jimmy pointed. "These margins aren't from thieves. Someone's been tracking the thefts, logging names and dates. This is investigative work. Elena recognized the handwriting without needing to be told. Her throat constricted with a mix of grief and fierce pride. This is Abuela Consuela's handwriting. She wasn't hoarding these pieces. She was trying to recover them. The room shifted around that revelation. Elena Rivera hadn't been a collaborator in a ring. She'd been a quiet, relentless investigator, using the mill as a secure evidence vault until artifacts could be returned to their rightful homes. Marcus's tone changed as he assessed the security array with new respect. Hidden access, acoustic guidance, environmental regulation. Abuela built an evidence archive, not a thief's den. Elena's phone buzzed, sharp in the close space. Dr. Victoria Ashford's name flashed on the screen. The timing felt like a knife. "Don't answer it," Jimmy hissed. "If Abuela was building a case, and people have died over this, you don't call back curious strangers." Elena let it roll to voicemail. The implication was ugly and obvious. Ashford's interest in the mill might not be innocent. Someone powerful had reasons to know exactly what the purchase unearthed. "We need to document everything," Elena said, rallying her professional training. "If Abuela was compiling evidence, we catalog it before anyone else finds out. And figure out who to trust," Marcus added. "If the Herald clippings are right, being here is dangerous." Above them, footsteps sounded across the mill's worn floorboards, deliberate, practiced. The echo had the certainty of someone who knew the building intimately. Elena shut off her flashlight and signaled for silence. Her heart hammered as she realized their 75-cent bargain had tied them to a conspiracy that had already cost lives. Her fingers trembled as she photographed the most crucial documents. The flash briefly lit jade and ceramic faces, and a faded letterhead from the University of Chicago. A note of recognition warmed and chilled her simultaneously. Correspondence from Professor David Chen, her former advisor and an expert in pre-Columbian authentication. "We need Professor Chen," she whispered, as the footsteps intensified. "Some of these pieces are from the 1994 Museum of Anthropology theft. I studied that case in grad school. $67 million vanished." Marcus cradled a jade ceremonial mask in the flash beam. "The stone seemed to glow. If Abuela's been tracking this for 30 years, then her death wasn't an accident," Jimmy finished, voice low and certain. "Whoever's upstairs probably killed her." At that instant, Elena's phone chimed again, a text from an unknown number. "Professor Chen gave me your contact. Your grandmother was helping us track stolen artifacts. Meet immediately." Maria Santos, Herald. The steps halted over their hidden room. Voices, at least two, filtered down through the mill's boards. Dr. Ashford's cultured cadence was unmistakable, accompanied by a deeper male voice. Metal clicked. The grinding mechanism that masked the chamber's entrance groaned as someone inspected it. Elena's scalp went cold. Through the margin notes she had just skimmed, she found the shape of the truth. Consuela Rivera had worked with federal teams and international agencies, using the bakery as cover and the mill as a safe house. A faded photograph showed her beside men from an FBI art crime team, smiling with the quiet defiance of someone who knew how to play a long game. "They were working with authorities," Elena breathed, showing Marcus the photo. "This was a safe house." The voices above grew clearer. Ashford's tone, once cultured, now threaded with malice. "She was clever," Ashford said. "She understood the operation. But her grandchildren are amateurs. They won't know what to look for." The second voice, Sheriff Frank Morrison's, carried the plain-spoken cadence Elena had heard in community meetings. Now it held a colder edge. "Should have taken care of them yesterday. Too many people saw them buy the place." "Patience, Frank," Ashford replied, moving on the mechanism. "Accidents don't raise questions like dead bodies do. If they've already found the chamber, we need to see what she collected before we dispose of witnesses." Elena felt bile rise. The respected curator and the hometown sheriff, trusted faces, had been disposing of threats for years. Consuela's death, her bravery, the secrecy of the mill, all of it reframed as a long fight that had finally found its heirs. From the corner of the chamber, Jimmy's hand found a narrow seam in the stone. He pointed to a dark channel Elena hadn't noticed, a tunnel leading away from the mill. "Emergency exit," he whispered. "Abuela showed me this in the bakery papers. It leads to the old root cellar." Above, the last bolts clicked, the hidden access primed to reveal them. Elena slid her phone into her pocket, breath steadying only enough to act. "Now," she said, and they slipped silently into the tunnel, clutching photos, folders, and the heavy knowledge that whatever came next would demand everything they'd inherited: courage, cunning, and the truth Consuela had died trying to expose. As they gathered the most crucial evidence files, Elena's phone received another message from Maria Santos. "Federal agents en route. Professor Chen contacted FBI art crime team. Stay hidden until you see official identification." The grinding mechanism above clicked into its final position, and Elena heard Ashford's satisfied exclamation. "There, 30 years of careful work, and these children stumble onto it by accident." Elena clutched her phone, praying that help would arrive before Ashford and Morrison discovered their hiding place. The artifacts surrounding them represented not just $67 million in stolen cultural treasures, but evidence of a conspiracy that had operated with impunity for decades, a conspiracy her grandmother had died trying to expose. The emergency tunnel Jimmy revealed led them through a labyrinth of passages that spoke of careful planning and engineering far beyond what any simple mill would require. Elena realized her grandmother had spent years preparing for exactly this situation, discovery. By the theft ring she'd been investigating, they emerged from the root cellar into morning sunlight that felt surreal after the chamber's artificial lighting. Elena immediately called Professor Chen, her former advisor, whose voice carried relief and urgency when he answered. "Elena, thank God. I've been trying to track you since Maria Santos contacted me about your grandmother's work. The FBI art crime team is coordinating with international agencies. Those artifacts you found represent one of the largest art theft recoveries in modern history," Professor Chen's words provided context for their grandmother's sacrifice. Consuela had been feeding information to legitimate authorities for years. The mill wasn't just evidence storage, it was a honey trap. She'd been gathering proof of the entire theft network's operations. Maria Santos met them at Jimmy's garage, her laptop displaying research that connected Dr. Ashford and Sheriff Morrison to suspicious deaths spanning 15 years. "Your grandmother wasn't their only victim," Maria explained. "But she was the most dangerous to their operation because she understood the cultural significance of what they were stealing." Elena studied Maria's documentation, recognizing her grandmother's methodical approach in the patterns of evidence. She was building a federal case. These aren't random thefts, they're systematic looting of specific cultural traditions. Marcus examined technical schematics he'd photographed from the chamber. The mill's security systems were designed to document everything: hidden cameras, audio recording equipment, environmental sensors that tracked when artifacts were moved. Jimmy's mechanical expertise proved crucial as he helped them understand the scope of their grandmother's preparations. She spent 5 years modifying that mill. Every system was designed to gather evidence while keeping the artifacts safe for eventual return to their rightful institutions. As they coordinated with Professor Chen and federal authorities, Elena realized their 75-cent purchase had activated a plan decades in the making. Her grandmother had orchestrated everything: the mill's eventual sale, the clues leading to discovery, even the timing that would bring legitimate authorities to investigate before the theft ring could relocate their operations. "She knew she was dying," Elena said with sudden clarity. "The way she prepared everything. She knew they would eventually kill her, and she made sure we would be able to finish what she started. But their planning was interrupted by Marcus's urgent warning." Through Jimmy's garage windows, they could see Sheriff Morrison's patrol car approaching, accompanied by 2 unmarked vehicles that suggested Dr. Ashford had brought reinforcements. Federal agents are 30 minutes out, Maria reported. We need to stay ahead of them until help arrives. Sheriff Morrison's voice carried the authority of law enforcement as he called out from the garage entrance. Folks, I need you to come out peacefully. There's been some misunderstandings about that mill property, and we need to sort things out officially. Elena felt the trap closing around them, but recognized they had no choice except to comply. As they emerged with hands visible, Dr. Ashford's satisfaction was evident in her cold smile. Miss Rivera, I do hope you found your exploration educational, Ashford said with mock politeness. Though I'm afraid you've stumbled onto matters beyond your understanding, Morrison's. Deputies secured their phones and electronics with efficient professionalism that suggested this wasn't their first such operation. Elena realized the corruption extended beyond just the sheriff. Multiple law enforcement officials were involved in protecting the theft ring. Back at the mill, Ashford forced them to fully reveal the chamber's contents, while she catalogued which artifacts would need immediate relocation. Elena watched in horror as priceless cultural objects were treated as mere inventory in a criminal enterprise. Your grandmother caused us considerable inconvenience, Ashford explained, as she examined a jade ceremonial calendar that belonged in the National Museum of Anthropology. 20 years of careful acquisition, and she threatened to expose our entire operation. But as Ashford inventoried the chamber's contents, her expression grew increasingly alarmed. Elena realized her grandmother's final trap was still unfolding. The artifacts were documented not just for evidence, but for authentication that would prove their theft from specific institutions. Where are the provenance records? Ashford demanded, her composure cracking. The old woman kept detailed documentation. Where are the files that show original ownership? Elena felt a moment of triumph as she realized her grandmother's strategy. The stolen artifacts were useless to private collectors without authentication documents that proved legitimate ownership, documents that Consuela had hidden. Elsewhere, Morrison grew impatient with Ashford's searching. We dispose of witnesses now, relocate the merchandise later. Federal attention means we need to clean this up immediately. Elena exchanged glances with Marcus and Jimmy, recognizing they were running out of time. But through the mill's acoustic systems, she could hear sounds that gave her hope. Multiple vehicles approaching, moving with the coordinated precision of law enforcement operations. Dr. Ashford, Elena said carefully, I think you should know that my grandmother's documentation went beyond just cataloging your thefts. She recorded everything, including your conversations in this chamber. Ashford's face went pale as she realized the mill's sophisticated audio systems had been recording their admissions of guilt for the past hour. The sound of vehicles surrounding the mill confirmed Elena's desperate hope. Through the stone walls, she could hear professional voices coordinating positions with the disciplined efficiency of federal law enforcement operations, FBI. Building is surrounded. All occupants exit with hands visible. Dr. Ashford's cultured composure shattered completely as she realized the scope of their exposure. The sophisticated woman who had terrorized their community for years now looked like what she truly was. A cornered criminal facing the end of decades of profitable theft. Sheriff Morrison attempted to assert his authority, even as federal agents secured the perimeter. This is local jurisdiction. You have no authority here without proper coordination through my office. The FBI art crime team's response came through clearly amplified speakers. Sheriff Morrison, you are under federal investigation for conspiracy, murder, and trafficking in stolen cultural artifacts. Surrender immediately. Elena felt overwhelming relief as Professor Chen's familiar voice joined the federal agents entering the mill. Elena, Marcus, are you safe? The chamber that had hidden $67 million worth of stolen artifacts now became the crime scene that would expose the entire theft network. Elena watched as federal agents carefully documented each piece while Dr. Ashford and Sheriff Morrison were secured in restraints. Maria Santos coordinated with FBI media relations to ensure The story received proper coverage. This recovery represents one of the largest art theft investigations in federal history, she explained to Elena. Your grandmother's documentation provides evidence of crimes spanning 3 decades. Professor Chen examined the artifacts with professional amazement. Some of these pieces were thought lost forever. Museums around the world will be able to reunite visitors with cultural treasures that were stolen before many people were born. But Elena's attention focused on a final folder she discovered in her grandmother's documentation, evidence that the theft ring extended far beyond Millbrook. International connections, private collectors who had knowingly purchased stolen artifacts, and a network of corruption that reached into major cultural institutions worldwide. Abuela didn't just catch local criminals, Elena realized. She exposed an international conspiracy. As federal agents continued processing the crime scene, Elena understood that her grandmother's sacrifice had accomplished something far greater than recovering stolen objects. The evidence would dismantle criminal networks that had operated with impunity for decades, protecting cultural heritage for future generations. Marcus found Elena standing beside the mill's grinding mechanism, tears streaming down her face as the full impact of their grandmother's heroism became clear. She knew exactly what she was doing, Elena said quietly. Every system, every clue, every risk she took, it was all planned to lead to this moment. The federal investigation moved with the swift precision of an operation years in the making. Dr. Ashford and Sheriff Morrison's attempts to destroy evidence had failed. Elena's grandmother's documentation was so comprehensive that even international law enforcement agencies were amazed by its scope and accuracy. Your grandmother was a legend in art recovery circles. FBI Art Crime Team Director Sarah Coleman told Elena as they supervised the careful removal of artifacts from the mill. Her work with international agencies saved countless cultural treasures, but this case was her masterpiece. Elena learned that her grandmother had been in contact with federal authorities for months before her death, knowing that the theft ring was growing suspicious of her activities. The mill had been prepared as both evidence vault and trap, designed to gather final proof of the conspiracy's extent. Dr. Ashford made one final desperate attempt to bargain. You have no idea how many private collectors depend on our services, she told federal agents. This investigation will expose legitimate institutions that unknowingly purchased pieces from our network. But Professor Chen's authentication work revealed that most major collectors had been willfully ignorant of the artifact's stolen status. Cultural objects of this significance don't appear on legitimate markets without provenance documentation, he explained. Anyone purchasing these pieces knew they were buying stolen goods. Elena watched as the jade ceremonial mask that had caught her attention was carefully packaged for return to the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. The artifact would be reunited with its cultural context. After 30 years of imprisonment in the mill's hidden chamber, the federal reward for recovering $67 million worth of stolen cultural artifacts was substantial, but Elena felt the money was secondary to the justice her grandmother had achieved. The theft ring's exposure would prevent future cultural destruction and return priceless artifacts to their rightful institutions. Marcus discovered that their grandmother had even arranged for the mill's eventual restoration through a legal trust that would activate after the federal investigation concluded. She planned everything, he said in amazement. Even our future. As Dr. Ashford and Sheriff Morrison were transported to federal detention facilities, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. Their 75-cent purchase had activated a plan that transformed their lives while protecting cultural heritage for generations. Standing in the mill that had hidden such momentous secrets, Elena understood that her grandmother's greatest gift hadn't been the financial reward or even the restored bakery. It had been the knowledge that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when guided by principle and love. 6 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of Rivera Cultural Center, watching visitors explore exhibits that told the story of art recovery and cultural preservation. The renovated bakery displayed reproductions of the recovered artifacts alongside educational materials about the importance of protecting cultural heritage. The mill itself had been transformed into a museum and research facility dedicated to art recovery and authentication. Professor Chen served as academic director, while Elena had discovered a passion for museum administration that combined her art history background with her grandmother's legacy of justice. Marcus managed the facility's technical operations, his engineering skills ensuring that proper environmental controls protected the exhibits, while sophisticated security systems prevented future thefts. The mill's original mechanical systems had been restored to working condition, demonstrating traditional grain milling techniques. Alongside modern conservation practices, Maria Santos documented their story as an example of ordinary people making extraordinary differences through courage and determination. Her coverage attracted international attention to art recovery work and inspired new funding for cultural preservation programs. "Your grandmother would be proud," Professor Chen told Elena as they reviewed plans for expanding the facility's educational programs. "This center will train the next generation of art recovery specialists while protecting cultural heritage for communities worldwide." Elena visited her grandmother's grave each month, bringing flowers and updates about the center's work. The simple headstone now carried additional meaning. It marked the resting place of a woman who had sacrificed everything to protect cultural treasures for future generations. The federal reward money had secured the center's operations for decades, but Elena understood that financial resources were less important than the principle her grandmother had embodied. Cultural heritage belonged to all humanity, and protecting it required constant vigilance from people willing to stand against those who would profit from destruction. Standing beside the mill's restored water wheel, Elena watched it turn steadily in the current that had powered it for over a century. The structure that had cost them 75 cents had connected them to a legacy far more valuable than money, the knowledge that individual courage could preserve irreplaceable treasures for the entire world. Marcus joined her beside the water wheel, both siblings understanding that their grandmother's final gift had been the opportunity to continue her work, protecting cultural heritage for future generations. "Think she knew how all this would turn out?" Marcus asked. Elena smiled, remembering her grandmother's uncanny ability to see potential where others saw only problems. "I think she knew exactly what she was doing. She just trusted us to be worthy of the legacy she left us." Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.